Okay, the sense of unreality and fantasy in that story, but you'll be amazed at their ability. And I'm sure you know the Dutch ability in the haulage trade. If a Russian submarine goes down, they ring up the Dutch to bring it up. If something happens in the mid-Atlantic, the Dutch get rung up, etc., etc. So their ability to handle hydraulics is extraordinarily strong. Okay, about 2 years ago, I talked to all sorts of meteorologists about these interesting problems. And down in the south then, the old border country between France and Holland, there's this row of forts, which initially, again, let me repeat, were to repeat a very physical enemy with soldiers and horses and cannon, but also to be able to find some way to regulate the water systems. One of these forts is called Fort Asperen. You all know the story of the little Dutch boy who put his finger in the dike and saved Holland. Well, imagine the opposite of that happened. Time and time again, the Dutch have voluntarily flooded their country to repulse the enemy. They did it with Louis XIV in 1673. They did it again in the middle of the 18th century. They did it again in anticipation of Napoleon, and they attempted to do it again with Hitler. Hitler was very clever, of course. He didn't come that way at all. He came through the Ardennes, so completely circumvented the problem. You can imagine what sense of self-sacrifice there is. Pull your finger out of the dike and the land fills up. As you know, certainly in that part of Holland, they're all based on polders, huge, huge areas, maybe 50 square kilometers, bounded by dikes, painfully put up by all those people who gravelled in the mud that I talked about in 800. But it's formed, of course, a great sense of protection, and it does seem to be an easy way to try and repulse the enemy. The last time they did do it successfully, I suspect it was probably in 1674 with Napoleon, but unfortunately that year the rainfall was not particularly high, so I think that probably the flooding of their own country was far more deleterious to the local farmers than it was to the enemy. Okay, that's the background. Mr. Greenaway, would you like to borrow our fort and do something about global warming? That's basically the brief. Of course, deeply fascinating. What shall we do? When you go to the south of Holland, there are many, many, many rivers. The Rhine, in many of its tributaries, always ends up all the way from the Swiss mountains, not far from here, all the way through Germany, ends up in the North Sea through Holland. And when you travel along those rivers, there's a great sense of remembrance of the bad times, of the disputes between Roman Catholic France and Protestant Calvinist Holland. Communities on one side, the south side of the rivers are all Roman Catholic. Cross the river, it doesn't take even at low tide or when the water's level, you can virtually walk across. All the communities on the north side of the river are all Protestant, but it's still like that. It's still like that 400 years afterwards. So it's known very largely as the Bible Belt. Okay, Mr. Greenaway, make us an event here about water, but we're also in the Bible event. What's the biggest event in the Bible about water? The flood. So we try and utilize, I suppose, all that amazing mythology. God's dissatisfaction with all you lot, you all have to go. A small family led by a man called Noah and his irascible wife are the only people allowed to be saved. Initially, I was fascinated by the idea of building the ark and sticking it on top of this very large fort. But the more we played with it, I thought it would be fun maybe to play perhaps with the beginning rather than the end. So we've sort of ended up with a halfway house, and we've rather tried to pretend that this fort is Mount Ararat. Mount Ararat in southern Holland. Not so impossible considering the Bible Belt. So we created a system, an exhibition, an installation, which are all those things that I'm passionately interested in because it's about museumology, it's about cinema language, it's about exhibition values, it's about presentation of a total multimedia phenomenon. And the basic metaphor then is to hoist a big ship and dump it on top of this huge tower. The initial idea of that was to get a real ship and hoist it up there, but the walls probably of the castle aren't that strong. These boats remain incredibly heavy. They were the successful boats, I suppose, that ferried all the cargo that created the original incredible richness of Holland. Certainly at the end of the 30 Years' War, I think Holland basically amassed all its present, I suppose, wealth between 1590 and 1630. And unlike the Spanish, who had huge amounts of gold from South America and frittered it all away, the Dutch at the same time not only got hold of a lot of that Spanish gold, of course, but managed to conserve all this money they made, basically selling salted herring to the rest of the Baltic nations. So they fed all the dying soldiers of the 30 Years' War. And if you know something about the 30 Years' War, in some ways it could be described as the first European war, because it wasn't just about soldiers, it was about civilians, old people, wives, children. It stretched all the way virtually from, shall we say, Dublin all the way to Baghdad, and from Oslo down to Casablanca. So it included Muslims and Islamic nations, the old, the poor, Anabaptists, Baptists, Lutherans, Calvinists, every single denomination. So in a sense it's a great cataclysmic event. And can you imagine, De Deer and Canny, clever Dutch, benefited from it all, and they still have that fortune. I think they're the largest investors in North America after the Japanese, even now. Okay, we're going to build then an ark belonging to Noah, and we're going to make this representation at the end of the adventure, so the ark arrives at Mount Ararat, but also we're going to create it at the beginning of the adventure. The boat that you see is, in a sense, Noah's Ark in preparation. It has a tower, so we can go right up into the sky, and there is this opposite level we can go right deep down inside the fortress itself. The fortress's architecture is completely circular, and during the winter months, good ecology in Holland demands that the castle is closed, because a rare Dutch bat hibernates in this place. There are only 43 of them. I've seen them all, counted them. You're not supposed to go into this building in the winter time, but we were allowed to sneak in with Wellington boots, because the bottom of the castle is totally flooded, and to take torches. I thought I would picture something like, you know, a Californian Hollywood movie, and they'll be fluttering around like something out of Batman. But they're about that big, and you really have to search for them, and they don't all sleep together. But anyway, I think from the 1st of October to the 1st of April, you're not supposed to go in there. When the bats finally departed from North Africa, then we moved in. And some of our criteria was to do with the notion of 40 days and 40 nights on the ocean. So Mr. and Mrs. Noah and their 6 children, if you believe the biblical account, need to occupy themselves, and they need to have luggage for the journey. So they pack 92 suitcases. Some of you know my excitement about number 92, the atomic number of uranium. And I suppose if you regard the world threat, and certainly what's happening in the Middle East now, it's not even petrol, it's to do with uranium. There is a way that the uranium, in a curious way, I suppose, is the water of Holland. So there's nice sort of comparisons to be made about disaster theory. So we, of course, packed 92 suitcases. We packed carrots for the elephants and buns for the giraffe, Old Testament Bibles for Mr. Noah. It's a Dutch situation, so we packed lots of cigars, good Havana cigars for the Dutch. Boots for walking the deck, gold paint for refurbishing the angel's wings, a suitcase of blood and ink, because one constantly through the history of Europe has replaced the other, and we made a guess of 92. Now it just so happened that the architecture of the castle was divided not into 92, but into 46 rooms. Couldn't have been better for us, so we've got 2 suitcases in every room. The castle is constructed on 3 levels, and we regarded, I suppose, the notion the ground level is hell. It represents the bottom of the sea. The middle level represents the surface of the sea, and the top level represents, in a sense, the sky. We had an Italian composer who made music for a structure that related both up the castle and sideways. Remember, it's circular. We were asked whether, in fact, we wanted to pump the water out of the cell, out of the bottom. We said, no, let's leave it there. And we supplied all our visitors, and there must have been about, I think it was 400 people every day, with Wellington boots. So you go into the bottom of the castle, well equipped with a torch and Wellington boots to splash around. Of course, children love this, but then so did the child and every adult. So it was great fun to walk about in this murky space, examining certainly the first line of suitcases and all the other activities that were associated with the voyage. On the second layer, we created concentric rings of water vessels, which were containing, again, of course, 46 different types of water, which were taken from all the rivers and all the tributaries and all the coastlines of 100 square miles.